All right. Last Sabbath, I talked about two special trumpets, silver trumpets, that was ordained by Yahweh. These trumpets were used, call to action. The first trumpet blew to get ready. Second trumpet blew. The last silver trumpet blew. We're moving. Now I want to talk to you about the first 5 trumpets of Revelation. Trumpets of Revelation is a warning call. But before I start, I want you to remember Proverbs chapter 3, verse 5. Trust Yahweh with all your heart, and do not rely on your own understanding. We look at things, it may be wrong, it may be right. So I just want to present this, which could be possible. I still see it happening this way. I have not seen anything to change my mind yet, so I'm just going to present it to you all. These are simply thoughts of what I see as possible fulfillments of the first 5 trumpets given in Revelation. Sequence of events could play out on any given year. However, I do believe it is very plausible for it all to begin close to the Feast of Tabernacles. Some had said that Moses approached Pharaoh just before Tabernacles, that this was the feast Moses approached Pharaoh for the Israelites to go out and celebrate. Yet obviously this was not the feast Yahweh knew they would be celebrating in the Exodus. It is believed that Yahweh could have talked to Moses through the burning bush on the Day of Trumpets. Then Moses approached Pharaoh 10 days later on the Day of Atonement. Yet Pharaoh not only refused to let the Hebrews go, he increased the workload, and the Hebrews were keeping the work quotas the same. So just as they were about to enter tabernacles, where they are commanded to rejoice, they were given more reason to be sad and mourn. It is possible that the plagues actually began not many days after that the Hebrews celebrated tabernacles. Though this is just a theory and truly cannot be proven, it seems that the judgments would have started after the days of the feast, giving the Hebrews the feast to overcome their challenge to rejoice in the face of their new trials. All of this is indeed the case. It means the plagues could have lasted close to 6 months. Till Passover, the 15th day of the first month. There is really no way to know exactly when the plague started, and agree that it is very easy to read it all as a sequential order that happened within the weeks up to Passover. Some have suggested that everything could have started around the 24th day of the 9th month, the time of Hanukkah. If this is indeed the case, it would mean the plagues only lasted about 3 months. And this does indeed seem interesting for several reasons. We find this is the same amount of time that Moses was hidden when he was a child. In Exodus 2, verse 2, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son, and she saw that he was a fine child. She hid him for 3 months. And this date has an interesting appearance in the prophets on Haggai chapter 2, verse 18. From this day on, from this 24th day of the 9th month, give careful thought to the day when the foundations of Yahweh's temple was laid. Give careful thought. Is there yet any seed left in the barn? Until now the vine and the fig tree, the pomegranate and the olive tree have not borne fruit. From this day on I will bless you. The word of Yahweh came to Haggai a second time on the 24th day of the month. Tell Zerubbabel, governor of Judea, that I will shake the heavens and the earth. I will overturn royal thrones and shatter the power of the foreign kingdoms. I will overthrow chariots and their drivers. horses and their riders will fall, each by the sword of his brother. Why the importance of noting the day here? Twice even, in verse 18 and verse 20. Is this to identify importance to this day? Possibly even showing when this prophecy that is given will take place? It's hard to say. We know that history is cyclical. Ecclesiastes 1 verse 9, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. And in Isaiah 46 verse 10, I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. This verse in Haggai is regarding the future. If the end is made known from the beginning, could this verse about the future be identifying something that happened in the past just as much as what will be happening in the future? Don't know, but it is interesting. But again, it's just a theory. So possibly starting sometime between Tabernacles and Passover, everything can begin by way of the birth pains. Just as Egypt was destroyed and Israel protected in the plagues, we will also be in the birth pains as well. I'm talking about devastation. We all know what devastation is now, don't we? We've been through Michael. All leading up to us being divinely protected in the wilderness during the time of the Antichrist. And just as the Israelites traveled for 42 cities during the wilderness, we will be protected during the 42 months of the Antichrist rule. I do not claim these as absolutes in any way, but understand that we are human. I'm simply giving current thoughts to what I see as having a very plausible fulfillment in these days we are living in. Nothing has changed my mind yet. As always, don't take my word for anything, but search the scriptures yourself and see what you see. And if anything, hopefully thoughts can trigger thoughts for you as well. We are all students. Having said that, in Isaiah 24 verse 1, behold, Yahweh lays the earth waste, devastates it, distorts its surface, and scatters its inhabitants. Regarding the inhabitants in verse 17, Isaiah 24:17, terror and pit and snare confront you, O inhabitant of the earth. Then it will be that he who flees the report of disaster will fall into the pit. He who climbs out of the pit will be caught in the snare. For the windows above are opened, and the foundations of the earth shake. The earth is broken asunder. The earth is split through. The earth is shaken violently. The earth reels to and fro like a drunkard, and it totters like a shack. For its transgression is heavy upon it, and it will fall, never to rise again. Its transgressions are heavy upon it. You see that happening today. Here we see that which would resemble a massive, in fact a global, shaking of the earth. And for the longest of times these verses were taken to be symbolic. However, a literal interpretation could very well be more than plausible. I talked to you about this last year. It could very well be an event like this which truly jumps the birth pains into high gear. An event that causes earthquakes around the globe in diverse places, if you will. Compare their similarity to those verses in Haggai chapter 2 that we read earlier concerning the prophecy given on the 24th day of the 9th month. Haggai 2:21. Tell Zerubbabel, governor of Judea, that I will shake the heavens and the earth. I will overturn royal thrones and shatter the power of foreign kingdoms. I will overthrow chariots and their drivers. Horses and their riders will fall, each by the sword of their brother. But these be the birth pains that set up a latter half of the confirmation of the new covenant. With this in mind, we go through the first 5 trumpets in their order and explain their potential fulfillment. Also, it must be noted that we are not declaring any of this to be facts, rather finding that I believe is very plausible. Finding that I believe should not be overlooked or quickly dismissed, because at least considered and looked at for a moment. First, we must ask ourselves, do the actual trumpets that sound in Revelation make these events happen? Or are they simply proclaiming that which is already coming? Unlike the seals and the bowls of Revelation, I believe the trumpets could actually be that of signifiers to that which is going to happen. That what makes those events happen. So am I saying that the trumpets will be audible for us to hear these warnings? I'm not saying that at all. Though I suppose that could be possible, at least for true believers to hear. I simply believe that the trumpets mentioned in Revelation are warnings of what will occur. The smoke alarm goes off, does not cause the fire. It's warning you there is something happening. The same with trumpets. I believe that these may be natural events pertaining to the birth pains that are to come, as mentioned in Matthew 24, and not so much judgments from the throne, if you will, but rather natural judgments that come about on a land because of disobedience. The whole world is ripe with disobedience. So the trumpets are warning signals for his people during this time. Let's begin with a few verses before the beginning of trumpets. A few verses that I believe are all too often overlooked. In Revelation 8, chapter 8, verse 3, another angel who had the golden censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense to offer, with the prayers of all the saints on the golden altar before the throne. The smoke of the incense, together with the prayers of the saints, went up before Yahweh from the angel's hand. Then the angel took the censer, filled it with fire from the altar, and hurled it on the earth, and there came peals of thunder, rumblings, flashes of lightning, and an earthquake. Then the 7 angels who had the 7 trumpets prepared to sound them. Here we see an action given with a result on the earth, a result that ended in an earthquake. This is the Greek word used here for earthquake, is number 4578, seismos. Seismos also rendering as a shakedown. Is it possible that this shakedown may very well be what causes the following sequences of events with the given warning of trumpets? First, the shakedown, the cause, that which makes the foundation of the earth to shake. Again, like what we see in Isaiah 24, verse 18, for the windows above are opened, and the foundations of the earth shake. The earth is broken asunder. The earth is split through. The earth is shaken violently. The earth reels to and fro like a drunkard, and it totters like a shack. For its transgression is heavy upon it, and it will fall, never to rise again. Yet here we see the details explained in the verses that follow the opening. Revelation 8, verse 7. The first angel sounded his trumpet, and there came hail and fire mixed with blood, and it was hurled down upon the earth. A third of the earth was burned up, A third of the trees were burned up, and all the green grass was burned up. Most have believed this was asteroids falling from the sky. And it's possible it could be. Yet the text doesn't say where the source of the hail and fire mixed with blood comes from. It simply says that it was hurled down upon the earth. If I gathered a bunch of rocks from the ground, and could I not then hurl them back down to the ground by initially throwing them up straight up into the air? That which goes up must come down. So what if the source of this hail, fire, and blood was all the active and potential active volcanoes on the earth? Think about it. Hail and fire by themselves can easily be understood for an asteroid, but where would the blood come from? However, take a volcano, and you can easily understand how it can look like hail, fire, and blood by way of the magma. Is it not possible that the Earth's crust could force magma up and out, given the very appearance of hail, fire, and blood mixed together? Could an earthquake that rocks the whole planet cause such an event? Time will only tell. But I believe that this is very plausible. Yahweh always uses his creation, one that should not be quickly dismissed. This scenario may be difficult to imagine since we've never seen something of that magnitude before. We only had a hint of it during Michael. But scientists have already declared that when the cauldron under the Yellowstone National Park goes off, that it will explode with a force 1,000 times more powerful than that eruption of Mount St. Helens back in 1980. I don't know how old you were back in 1980, but I remember that. It was in the news for quite some time. That one volcano has potential underneath Yellowstone National Park to be 1,000 times more powerful than Mount St. Helens. That in itself is hard to imagine. Yet of most every volcano on Earth is thrusted into activity at the same time, the devastation would truly be unimaginable. Yet, could there really be shaking that would affect that many fault lines on the Earth, which would in turn affect that many volcanoes? Well, here's some thoughts to consider. Did you know that the Ring of Fire has 452 volcanoes? I told you this last year. 452 volcanoes. It's home to over 75% of the world's active and dormant volcanoes. 3/4 of all active and dormant volcanoes sit on the Ring of Fire, sometimes called the Circum-Pacific Belt or the Circum-Pacific Seismic Belt, and even the Pacific Rim. About 90% of the world's earthquakes and 81% of the world's largest earthquakes occur along the Ring of Fire. All the way down, let's start to the bottom, South America, all the way up the west coast, followed up past California, up into Alaska, turn around, come back down towards Hawaii, all the way over across to the European side of the earth. You got Japan, follow Japan down and come back up to South America again. That's the Ring of Fire. So you can see the scenario is more plausible in just the first trumpet alone. Trumpet number 2. Revelation 8, verse 8. The second angel sounded his trumpet, and something like a huge mountain, all ablaze, was thrown into the sea. A third of the sea was turned into blood, a third of the living creatures in the sea died, a third of the ships were destroyed. This is apocalyptic language. And that language has shown that mountain to represent that of a nation or country. We already know that the earthquake that Japan had back in 2011 literally shifted Japan 8 inches. So if a 9.0 earthquake shifts Japan by 8 inches, what kind of earthquake would it take to make the island of Japan go underwater? It may sound silly at first, but don't forget Japan physically sits on the Ring of Fire. Could Japan be that huge mountain that is thrust into the sea? Could this same earthquake that thrust all volcanoes into action along with the Ring of Fire actually cause Japan to go under? Only time will tell. Knowing that an isolated 9.0 earthquake causes it to shift 8 inches, is it really that unthinkable to consider that a megaquake that shakes the whole earth could submerge it? This would obviously cause a tsunami of unbelievable proportions. That would explain the 1/3 of the ships being destroyed. And if it would be Japan, that would explain the waters turning to blood by way of their nuclear reactors that have plutonium that is said to be 1,000 times more lethal than that of Chernobyl. Again, it's plausible as well within the spectrum of reality. Trumpet number 3, Revelation chapter 8, verse 10. The third angel sounded his trumpet, and a great star, blazing like a torch, fell from the sky on 1/3 of the rivers and on springs of water. The name of the star is Wormwood. 1/3 of the waters turned bitter, and many people died from the waters that had become bitter. Many have believed this to be an asteroid, and it is possible. But the problem is that we never see the impact of this star in the verses. Yet we know it affects 1/3 of the rivers and 1/3 of the springs of water. How? That's the question. As we will see in the 5th trumpet, a star is shown. The blowing of the trumpets in Revelation can actually be a fallen angel. I'll cover that more in the 5th chapter. Yet in this case, as the 5th trumpet, I believe this star to be that of a fallen angel. Could this fallen angel somehow worsen the effects of the first 2 trumpets on water sources? In the light of natural events, this trumpet could very easily be caused from the remaining effects that simply compounds from the first 2 trumpets. It says that the waters become bitter. Think of it for a moment. Between the toxic ash of the volcanoes and the radiation from the nuclear plants in Japan that will be working its way around the globe, do we really think that water supplies are not going to be affected? Remember, the trumpets are declaring what's coming. They are not making them come. The fact that I hold to this star being a falling angel will make more sense when we cover the 5th trumpet. It is interesting to note a parallel here. Again, notice how the waters become bitter and how many die from the waters. What about those who don't die from the bitter waters? Numbers chapter 5, verse 11 talks about the woman who is accused of adultery. It discusses the process of finding out if she's guilty. It just so happens that the process includes her drinking bitter waters. Some have even suggested that this parallels also that of when Moses came down from getting the stone tablets and found many of the people dancing around a golden calf. What did Moses do? He ground up the golden calf and put it in the water for the people to drink. It is suggested that those who were killed that day were identified as the adulterers because they were sick from that which they drank. Meaning that the water with the gold in it made them ill, and those who didn't dance around the calf were not affected by the water. Those who were made sick from the waters were then struck down. Could it be in the end times that the Father gives those of his people who are accused of adultery bitter waters to drink, as prescribed in Numbers chapter 5? Then those who are found guilty will be stoned in the final bowl of wrath, as mentioned in Revelation 16. In verse 21, Revelation 16:21, from the sky huge hailstones, about 100 pounds each, fell upon them. And they cursed Elohim on account of the plague of hail, because the plague was so terrible. This is truly a stunning parallel, and one that I believe should be considered. Don't overlook it. So could it be possible that the first bowl identifies those who are guilty? Revelation 16 verse 2. The first angel went and poured out his bowl on the land, and ugly and painful sores broke out on the people who had the mark of the beast and worshipped his image. Then it all concludes with the stoning of the last bowl. Only time will tell. Trumpet number 4. The fourth angel, Revelation 8 verse 12, the fourth angel sounded his trumpet, and a third of the sun was struck, a third of the moon, a third of the stars, so that the third of them turned dark. A third of the day was without light, and also a third of the night. Notice here how on the fourth trumpet, a third of the sun, moon, and stars are turned dark, just like that of the first trumpet, where a third of the earth, trees, and grass are burnt up. After volcanoes erupt, ash clouds can cover multiple square miles within hours before settling. Just like in Iceland, a volcano erupted in 2010. It sent ash, smoke, and steam miles into the air, covering many square miles. Just one. Imagine 452 volcanoes erupt together within 12 to 24 hours. It says that a third of the sun, moon, and stars turn dark. Interestingly enough, as you can see, it appears the ring of fire covers over 1/3 of the planet. It doesn't take much to imagine to see that this could easily be caused by the first 3 trumpets. So we see the first 4 trumpets could easily be simultaneously back-to-back events that are actually tied to one massive event within a 12 to 24 hour period. But we see the remaining trumpet are set apart from the first 4. In Revelation 8 verse 13, and as I watched, I heard an angel that was flying in the mid-air call out in a loud voice, "Woe, woe, woe to the inhabitants of the earth, because of the trumpet blast about to be sounded by the other 3 angels." Trumpet 5, Revelation 9, verse 1. The fifth angel sounded his trumpet, and I saw a star that had fallen from the sky to the earth. The star was given the key to the shaft of the abyss, and when he opened the abyss, smoke rose from it like the smoke of a gigantic furnace. The sun and sky were darkened by the smoke of the abyss. We'll continue on the text in a moment, but first look at how the star that fell was given a key and then opened the abyss. Does that sound like a fallen star or asteroid? Or does it sound like a fallen angel? This is why I see the star in the third trumpet to also be that of a fallen angel. Revelation 9 verse 3. And out of the smoke locusts came down upon the earth and were given power like that of scorpions of the earth. They were given power like scorpions. They weren't scorpions. They were told not to harm grass or the earth or any plant or tree, but only those people who did not have the seal of Yahweh on their foreheads. They were not given power to kill them, but only to torture them for 5 months. And the agony they suffered was like that of a sting of a scorpion when it strikes a man. During those days, men will seek death, but will not find it. They will long to die, but death will elude them. The locusts looked like horses prepared for battle. On their heads they wore something like crowns of gold. Their faces resembled human faces. Their hair was like woman's hair, and their teeth were like lion's teeth. They had breastplates like breastplates of iron, and the sound of their wings was like the thundering of many horses and chariots rushing into battle. They had tails and stings like scorpions, and in their tails they had power to torment people for 5 months. They had as king over them the angel of the abyss, whose name in Hebrew is Abaddon, and in Greek, Apollyon. What you are about to hear may sound utterly absurd, and I agree it kind of does. However, if you were told that the Red Sea was going to be divided in two in front of you, I'm sure you would have said this. That sounds absurd. With this in mind, I don't ask that you just believe what I tell you. I ask that you keep it as something to be considered. There's been a lot of science from this prophecy on these verses in the 5th trumpet. So now, I'd like to give you something that I believe seems to make perfect sense as a possible interpretation of these words. We know that Scripture says that history repeats itself. Ecclesiastes 1 verse 9, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. In order to give an understanding to this possible interpretation, let's read from 2 Thessalonians chapter 2 verse 9. The coming of the lawless one will be in accordance with the work of Satan, displayed in all kinds of counterfeit miracles, signs and wonders, and in every sort of evil that deceives those who are perishing. They perish because they refuse to love the truth and so be saved. For this reason, Yahweh sends them a powerful delusion so that they will believe the lie, and so that all will be condemned who have not believed the truth but have delighted in wickedness. Yahweh himself sends a powerful delusion. As mentioned here, it seems to come before the lawless one and his counterfeit miracles, signs and wonders and evil that he deceives with. It's because of this powerful delusion that those who refuse to love the truth will be deceived by the workings of the lawless one. The true test of a prophet or miracle worker is they follow the teachings of Torah, the commandments of Yahweh. Even if his prophecies come true and his miracles take place before your very eyes, if he teaches others to follow anything other than what is commanded in the Torah, he is declared a false prophet. Deuteronomy 13, verse 1. If a prophet or one who foretells by dreams appears among you and announces to you a miraculous sign or wonder, and if that sign or wonder of which he has spoken takes place, and he says, let us follow other Elohims you have not known, and let us worship them, you must not listen to the words of that prophet or that dreamer. Yahweh your Elohim is testing you to find out whether you love him with all your heart and with all your soul. It is Yahweh your Elohim who must follow, and him you must revere. Keep his commands and obey him. Serve him and hold fast to him. Regarding 2 Thessalonians, what form of powerful delusion could make people turn from Yahweh and follow after a lie? What kind of event could happen that would convince people to follow the Antichrist and his miracles? What if fallen angels made themselves manifested by way of aliens? Stop thinking of these aliens from a different star system. They're aliens from the spiritual world. As strange as that may sound, what if? Yet not much is given to us in how they reveal themselves in those days. What if they manifested themselves as a higher life form from another planet? Everybody's so convinced there's life out there. Is that really so hard to believe? Maybe for some. But knowing that the scriptures mention this has happened once before, are we to believe it can't happen again? Knowing that there are indeed ancient accounts given record to this in previous civilizations, how the scriptures have recorded to it in harmony with other accounts, why should any of us be surprised at this being at least a possible fulfillment to the fifth trumpet in Revelation chapter 9? And don't forget Isaiah 46 verse 10 says, I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times what is still to come. I say my purpose will stand, and I will do all that I please. That definitely gives reason to believe that there may be more to what Yeshua said in Matthew 24, verse 37. As it was in the days of Noah, so it will be in the coming of the Son of Man. We know this verse on the surface is alluding to how everyone is just living their lives and not knowing the judgment is coming. Yet, could this one sentence be alluding to something else? Could it be that in the days of the return of Messiah, at the end, that the ways of the Nephilim have returned by way of the fallen angels all over again, as mentioned in the book of Genesis, revealing themselves as aliens? There are those who oppose this belief as being something plausible, and I respect that, but research and look at the teachings of others, I have not seen enough evidence to say that this should be ruled out. In reference to making known the end from the beginning, it's interesting to note that the locusts of the fifth trumpet are given power for 5 months. 5 times 30 days is 150 days. Now comparing the days of Noah, Genesis 7 verse 24, the waters flooded the earth for 150 days. Are these dots that we should be connecting together? I'm not sure, but it is interesting nonetheless. Time will tell. There are some who even refer to the aliens as Anunnaki. They believe these were the ones who were in Mesopotamia, and that they are returning to, once again, enslave much of mankind. Interestingly enough, Anunnaki may very well have been those mentioned in Numbers 13 when Moses sent the spies into the land. Numbers 13 verse 22, they went up through the Negev and came to Hebron, where Ahiman, Shishai, and Talmai, the descendants of Anak, lived. Hebron had been built 7 years before Zoan in Egypt. The phrase, the descendants of Anak, in the Hebrew actually says the descendants born of the Anakim. A little further down, in Numbers 13 verse 28, but the people who live there are powerful, and the cities are fortified and very large. We even saw the descendants of Anak there. Again, the Anakim. Further down still, Numbers 13:31, but the men who had gone up with him said, we can't attack these people. They are stronger than we are, and they spread among the Israelites a bad report about the land they had explored. They said, the land we explored devours those living in it. All the people we saw there are of great size. We saw the Nephilim there, the descendants of Anak, come from the Nephilim. We seemed like grasshoppers in their own eyes, and we looked the same to them. And again, it's the Anakim. The biblical accounts of the recordings of Anakim could very easily be those noted in the Anunnaki from the Mesopotamian records. Both give accounts to them being very large individuals, and both accounts are dated to be thousands of years old. It's quite possible that in Ecclesiastes 1 verse 9, what has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There's nothing new under the sun. This may very well be the powerful delusion that Yahweh sends so that people will believe the lie of the Antichrist as mentioned in 2 Thessalonians chapter 2. If an event of this nature and magnitude happened in the midst of the birth pains, that of a large earthquake, imagine what would be going through the minds of the survivors of the first 4 trumpets, of those who were not true believers, and especially those who do not even claim to be followers of Yeshua. The devastation from the shaking of the earth alone would make many say, how could God let such a terrible thing happen? Then, if, and I say if, so-called aliens, fallen angels, would appear in the guise of the origins of the Anunnakis, the very existence of Elohim would not only be questioned, it would be mocked upon by a huge majority of the remaining populace, especially in light of the sun god prophecies that will at that moment have come true. So, making other civilization prophecies true and making those of the scripture seem meaningless, especially since the prophecies of the dearly held pre-tribulation rapture that so many believed and they hang on to a dear life. This would not only create a huge disregard for Yahweh and His Word, it would generate an intense hate for anyone who tried keeping their faith in Him. The ties in line with what Yeshua said right after His first mentioning of the beginning of the birth pains in Matthew 24 verse 8. Well, actually, verse 7. For nation shall rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and there will be famines and earthquakes in various places, and all these are but the beginning of the birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time many will turn away from the faith, and will betray and hate each other. Many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will go cold. But he who stands firm to the end will be saved. The key word in verse 9 is then, indicating it takes place right after the wars and revolutions and famines and earthquakes have taken place, or at least just after they have truly started. If, and I say if, these fallen angels are what the locusts are referring to in the 5th trumpet in Revelation 9, then these verses that explain that which happens after the beginning of the birth pains makes all the more sense. Believers will truly be hated for holding on to the name of Messiah Yeshua, from a biblical perspective anyways, in light of what will be transpiring before the whole world. Quite possibly, like Noah may have been mocked for building the ark. I realize that this is all a lot to take in, and like all others who voice their thoughts on these verses, I don't claim to be a specialist. I simply hope that they help us all to open our hearts to the Spirit and not hold on to interpretation just because that's what we've always been told. Jeremiah 4 verse 19. My bowels are in pain at my very heart. My heart makes a noise in me. I cannot hold my peace, because thou hast heard, O my soul, the sound of the trumpet, the alarm of war. Destruction upon destruction is cried, for the whole land is spoiled. Suddenly are my tents spoiled, and my curtains in a moment. How long shall I see this standard and hear the sound of the trumpet. Could this be the first 4 trumpets in Revelation sounding back to back? Jeremiah 4, verse 22. For my people are foolish, they know me not. They are stupid children and have no understanding. They are shrewd to do evil, but to do good they do not know. I looked on the earth, and behold, it was formless and void, and to the heavens, and they had no light. I looked on the mountains, and behold, they were quaking, and all the hills moved to and fro. Could these verses soon find themselves coming to a literal fulfillment? Time will only tell. I pray that you begin your own research on this matter and determine what actions, if any, you need to do to prepare. I believe that Yahweh does nothing without first revealing to his servants what he is going to do. Amos 3:7. Surely the sovereign Yahweh does nothing without revealing his plan to his servants, the prophets. So we pray that all of our hearts will be attentive to that which the Father is speaking at the time. I want to clarify that this is not to scare anyone, but rather to prepare for it. Proverbs 27, verse 12. The prudent see danger and take refuge. The simple keep going and suffer for it. I know that the Father has been calling his people back to his ways. It's my prayer that people will return to his ways. Otherwise, many of his people may eventually see the exact same as those taken in a disbursement of those of Hosea. Hosea 6, verse 1. Come, let us return to Yahweh. He has torn us to pieces, but he will heal us. He has injured us, but he will bind up our wounds. Let us not forget Yahweh's own words in Isaiah 46, verse 10. I make known the end from the beginning, from ancient times, what is still to come. I say, my purpose will stand, and I will do that I please. Yahweh bless.